Alors, alors bonjour. Bienvenue à la présentation sur l'accord
So,
d'échange entre l'Europe et
so
Québec.
now Europe and Quebec,
À la présentation sur
and
le
the
Québec à votre
presentation
table,
on
différents
Quebec at your
niveaux.
table.
Donc, c'est une présentation de
Stand
l'offre
out.
alimentaire
So,
québécoise et les occasions
what's
d'affaires
on offer in
avec le
Quebec
Québec pour la grande distribution,
for
donc la GMS et les
mass
services
retail
alimentaires européens.
and for European food
Donc,
services?
je me présente, je suis Sébastien Lenindre
I'm
de Propulsion Courtier.
Sébastien Lenindre,
Évidemment, vous l'entendez, québécois.
and as you
Et
can tell
j'ai
from my
une
accent, I'm from
expertise
Quebec. I've got 30 years expertise
négociation. Donc, j'étais
in
acheteur
trade, and I was a buyer before
dans
in trade.
l'alimentation,
I was a
spécialiste
food
en
buyer
alimentation de
specialized
GMS et de ce qu'on
in
appelle nous food service,
food
donc services
services
alimentaires, la distribution et la négociation. Je fais
and
aussi des
negotiation.
changements
So
à mon
now
compte. Je
I'm
suis ambassadeur de marque.
self-employed. I'm a
Je
brand
représente les
ambassador.
manufacturiers québécois
I
à l'étranger.
represent
Je fais
food,
aussi
Quebec
du
food manufacturers
sourcing.
abroad.
Donc,
I do sourcing.
sourcing, je pense qu'on a la même appellation
I
en
think it's
France.
called
Donc,
the same thing
c'est
in
de
France.
rechercher pour
So
les
try to
clients
find, I go
européens
out and look
des
for
produits
European
québécois ou
customers,
produits
Quebec
canadiens.
or
Et je fais
Canadian
une stratégie
products, and I do
d'import-export
strategy
de
of
la
import-export as well
spécialisation en alimentation au niveau du Canada.
for Canada as well on
Donc,
specialist products. So,
j'ai fait poser des petites questions. Alors, c'est un petit peu participatif.
so it's a bit
Donc,
participative. I'm going to ask you some question. Who has eaten
à la levée
products
sans
from
la main.
Quebec?
Donc, c'est
From
sûr que les
Quebec.
Québécois
Lift
me
your hand
font
up.
signe.
So, okay, there's the
Donc,
Quebec people here, so that's
c'est
good.
tout. OK. Donc,
Is that it?
ma
Okay.
première question, c'est qui en a
My
déjà
next
acheté en
question,
Europe?
who's bought them already in Europe?
Ah, les Québécois, c'est bon.
So the Quebecers, that's good.
Et, mais je disais, à part le sirop d'érable,
So apart from
l'asperge et le
maple
kiwi,
syrup,
j'imagine que
cranberries and
il n'y a plus rien qui
blueberries,
se fait.
so I
Donc,
guess
c'est
nobody's
pour ça
going to
qu'on
say
est
anything
ici.
there.
Le Québec est à l'honneur au même
So
titre
that's why
pour,
Quebec is here.
d'après moi, cette raison. Donc, ce qu'on va voir dans la
So what we're going to see in the
présentation, c'est que
presentation
le Québec a plus
is
à vous
what
offrir.
Quebec has got to offer
Je
you.
vais vous parler de mots-clés,
And the
pas beaucoup de
keywords,
chiffres, juste des,
not a lot of figures, just a few
en français, des points,
bullet points.
en tout cas, bref, concis.
Anyway, I'll be brief.
On va parler de la
We're going to talk about multi-ethnicity of Quebec,
appellations réservées.
about our special appellations and the treasures to discover.
C'est, bon, je ne sais
So,
pas si vous le savez, mais le
I don't know if you know, but Quebec has got
32
32,000 companies in farming, fishing, aquaculture, and food processing. 2,400 are in processing. So you're going to see for the Europeans here, with the presentation that Linda's going to make, it's, when you look at the population, when you look at the ratio in relation to France, say, 55% of the final production is exported to 160 countries. And so we're ready to export. Quebec has exports of $8.2 billion a year, 5.1 billion euros a year. So of course you can save with the exchange rate if you're doing this. We're modern, safe industry. We've got all the we apply all the regulations, and $605 million in 2016 in investments in 2016. So our main exports, so there's some pictures just to show you that, of course, as everybody knows, pork is what we export most, 932 million euros, 35 million euros a year. And I've put maple as well, and honey, maple, sugar, and honey, 6.9%. And you can see all the others there on the pie chart. So it's fairly evenly spread. 14.3% chocolate and cocoa. Americans come to produce their chocolate bars in Quebec because of for tax reasons. So we don't actually grow chocolate in Quebec, but we process it for the Americans. So here's a trade balance of Quebec.
Donc, vous voyez, l'Europe est le deuxième marché d'importation pour le Québec.
So you can see import for Quebec after the United States, 28.3%. And in money in 2016, we imported 1.28 billion euros, whereas for export, this is where my point's important, we exported almost 3 billion euros to Europe. 3 million, sorry. So it's the third export market for Quebec after the US and Asia. So there, you can see that we've got a way to go before we have a balanced balanced out trade balance. So Quebec, we've had a lot of immigration because we hadn't got enough babies, and you can see the main from 2011 2015. You can see where people came in. There's some French people here. 8.1% of French emigrated to Quebec, and the leader just in front is the Chinese. So generally, we see lots of different ethnicities. And you look at the table, you say, "Wow, there's all these French people in Quebec." 258,000 immigrants. So what does that bring? Well, they bring, of course, demography, or demographics, but their cultural know-how from their country of origin, and they come with their products from the Middle East, say, but with couscous, for instance, couscous, they say it's the best couscous in the world. Their couscous is the best couscous in the world that they bring with them, if you like. So you mix it with the best cereals in the world, quinoa and so on, zinda, for instance, they do that. And this enables us to show the multiplicity of Quebec. So pita bread from Andalos, they're not with us. It's just, you can imagine the know-how that's there. We've got baobab juice. Well, of course, we haven't got baobabs growing in Quebec, but Evelyn, the owner, she takes baobab powder, she imports it to Quebec, bottles it in Quebec, and now is ready to export it. And just to say, we're talking about exporting it to Africa. So there you go. There's big potential there. So there's a big potential there for Africa. And smoked meat from Schwartz. I don't know if you've heard about Schwartz smoked meats. So Polish Jews who came to Quebec a long time ago, and they brought the knowledge of smoked meat. So people from abroad come to Montreal specifically to eat at Schwartz's. And there's another restaurant where which doesn't exist anymore, but Schwartz belongs to Céline Dion. So it was René who owned it, who was a partner in it before, but now it's Céline Dion. So interesting to export that, but they're not doing that yet. And Kousmos, Berber immigrant who they're selling the couscous with Quebec products, but with Berber know-how. So now, more technical side of things, we've got our special appellations. We've got our it's the same as for use for us, but different degrees. So we've got things that are distinguished because of their specific characteristics. We've got 5: organic, Quebec ice cider, ice wine, Canadian cow's milk cheese, which comes from Normandy, in fact, and Neuville. So, 2016 for organic, 1,600 companies had organic certification, more than 60% than in 2006. 10 years earlier, there was 1,025. So phenomenal growth. You're interested buy organic in France, so we're ready. And Quebec has got more than 8,000 organically certified products. So there's a trend there. In Quebec, the word organic, they're protected by law, and the law is used as a term of valorization. And they give the accreditation to each of the organizations. Ice cider. Je vais en parler tout à l'heure. I'm going to talk about this a bit later on, but it's cider. I mean, you know cider very well, but our cider comes solely from late variety apples. So at the end of autumn, and they fall with when the ice comes. So that's what we call it, ice cider. Partial fermentation of the apple juice. I mean, you can see it all there. So you've got the different ice ciders that have got this appellation. You've got ice wine as well, the same principle with grapes rather than apples. So the Canadian breed cheese. So it's cheese. So we're not ready to export it yet, we're going to work on it, but this breed descends from Normandy, Brittany cows in the 16th century, 17th century, and some were brought to New France between 1608 and 1670. And so this is recognized by having a level of grass and protein which is very high, and interesting casein levels, and the milk is very appreciated for its for cheese manufacturing. So this has got a special denomination. So you're going to have to come to Quebec to taste these cheeses. So the sweet corn, Noville sweet corn, we can't export it because of exhaustivity. So it can only be preserved 12 hours without refrigeration, or 48 hours if it's in a cold chamber. So unless we send it by plane, unless you come to Quebec, you'll never be able to eat it. But we would invite you to come. So other appellations to come. The government is working on this. So there's the Chantecler poultry, farm cheese, which you've got as well in France, the Ile cheddar, and Quebec wines. So here, what you can discover, I'm not going too fast, everything okay? So what you can see here, of course, the map of Quebec, and products which are worth going and seeing. They're real treasures of the open spaces and the lakes. I'll start with the Labrador tea. It's an exception because it's not in Quebec. I mean, it used to belong to Quebec and it was ceded to Newfoundland. But it's found as well in the tundra, and there's the duck, the Muscovy duck, which you've got in France. So we've got a lot of French people who bring this know-how. So we've got that. We've got bison, a big stereotype. So we're getting a label to permit to not just me, but the whole of Canada. So the Stimson clam, this is fantastic. You can only find it there, and it's the same thing for that whelk. What's very important, you must understand, they're only found here. And we're not looking at these Me Too products that you've already got. What we want to bring you is products which are very different. Our know-how, the know-how of Canadian craftsmen. So lobster, you've got lobster, it's not the same. Breton lobster, so from La Madeleine and the northern coasts. Of course, maple syrup. Of course, the blueberries. Of course, this new superfruit as well, blue honeysuckle that comes from Quebec, and cranberries. Of course, you've got down there at the bottom. But you can make it. You can make jam out of it, but the same way as with cranberry and with blueberries. And of course, we make organic. We've got. You can come and taste this jam on our stand, and you can even buy it, I think. No? Yeah. So there's wine as well. We make the wine out of these berries as well. So which is excellent as well, and salmon. And of course, lots of other things too. I didn't have enough space to put all the little dots on there. So the best thing to do is to come and see us in the Quebec Pavilion, talk with the people who are there, so that they can talk about their culinary treasures, and to get you to know our products. A quick non-exhaustive list that you can see at L43, which is Quebec. We've got We've got the blueberries. We've got the jam. We've got the blue honeysuckle. We've got balsamic vinegar, which is flavored with products. We've got alcohol. I'm not going to give you the list of everything because everything's there, and everything is at L43. Then we've got J42 for Cibon Foods. So they're all good products. So I mean, it's worthwhile going to see them. Zinda at J42, same kiosk, the same stand, but with different little bits. Your Bar Factory, which produces cereal bars, nutritional bars, iSense, and then you've got maple syrup. And then, of course, I wanted to finish with the best thing that we've got as well, of course, is poutine. Any questions? Any questions? No? There's 4 Quebecers here, so I mean, but maybe the French people, the Europeans. You got a question? No, I thought you were moving. I was, Well, thank you all very much. I'm going to hand over now to Linda.
C'est bon? Vous m'entendez? Donc,
Can you hear me? Hello, I'm Linda Gagnon. I work at the General Delegation at the Quebec government. My job is taking care of various activity sectors, agri-food, health, consumer goods, cosmetics, fashion design, everything imaginable beyond agri-food. So we have a diplomatic status. We are like an embassy in Paris. Our Prime Minister was welcomed last week by Mr. Macron, in addition to his counterpart, Edouard Philippe. So they had Jacques Dezan, so they had meetings. So it's we cover many sectors of activity, fashion and everything. So we're very present. There's always some Quebecer presenting a TV show or something. But anyway, I'm going to be talking about something a little less sexy, a little less exciting. I think the head negotiator might not be happy for me to call it not so exciting, but it's a little more difficult to talk about the Quebec products. But it's really important for French and Canadian companies, because this is a tool that will allow for really interesting exchanges for customs duties that are going to be in place. So we have a department, and my colleagues, very important. I have Chantal Santoine, who's very precious to me. So our goal is to help Quebec companies get set up in France with market study, market research. We set up appointments for them. We also try to be the facilitator, because my role isn't to be an expert at all. I'm the facilitator between the French and the Quebecers. Okay, not only do you have accents, you people, the French people have accents, so it's hard for the Quebecers here to. So I have to be the facilitator between the French and the Quebecers. No, I'm kidding, but in a way, it's the customs are very different. So things are done completely differently in Quebec compared to France. We're much more North American, if you will. So sometimes even for appointments, it's easier to go through the Quebec government, sort of like the French Economic Mission in Canada, as well as Business France, that provide services for companies that want to get set up in Canada. I've got my comments here on my handout, my paper here. I'm trying to not lose my papers here. So I'm kind of old school, but I have written papers. I couldn't get all my comments on my presentation. So France is a very important commercial partner for Quebec, the leading importer of our products in Canada. They're our third biggest partner in Europe, behind Germany and the UK, and our sixth worldwide partner behind, of course, the US, China, Germany, UK, and Mexico. Germany. Okay, I did mention our leading European customer for the French. Of course, there's a beautiful friendship between France and Quebec, and even though you guys do have an accent, well, even though French people do have an accent, we do kind of speak the same language. And it's easier to do business with you, say, than when you have the language barrier. Okay, they're going to say Linda Gagnon is really old school, but that's me. That's my personality. So here's a comparison between Quebec and France. See, we are 3 times bigger than you geographically, but that only represents 12% of our population. Density-wise, completely different, of course, 6.4 per square kilometer, and you have 116. So completely different situations here. Unemployment, 6.4% in Canada, compared to, I'm not sure these are still accurate, because there's a really huge shortage of labor, skilled labor in Canada. So a lot of people are coming in recruiting, even recruiting our Canadians. So growth, I think, is pretty similar. GDP, similar. Looking at our economic relations, it's 4.2 billion in the commercial trade. Exchanges are about 160. So for Quebecers to come into France, the exchange rate is not very favorable for the Quebecers, but it's interesting for you, for the French, to go over there. But for business, it's interesting it's good for the Quebecers, because the exchange rate is low for us. That means that you buy products from Quebec, and it's less expensive for you here in France. So 4.2, that's about 2 billion euros.
La même chose, ça c'est pour les exportations de produits français vers le Québec.
Okay, if we look at the exports, we're at 2.6 billion. 2.6, it's a little less than that in euros. So the main export sectors, okay, agri-food, machines, turboreactors, gas turbine engines, electric panels for about $561 million. Agri-food, that's really important. You export a lot of wine and cheese to us in Quebec and Canada, and chemicals, where France is very high in, say, cosmetics and perfume, about 600 million, nearly 500 million, Canadian dollars. Before I wrap up, I needed to come back on a point. French export of food goods, processed food goods, and exported to Canada would be about 550 million euros in 2016. So France is a leading exporter of food goods to Canada. And of course, it's compared to the European Union. That's about 24% of total export of the European Union.
Alors voilà, je vais vous parler de l'AECG.
Right, I'm going to be talking about the AECG. This is my sector. I do help Quebecer companies get established in France, but I also am in charge of promoting. 21st of September last year, you have the application of the Global Commercial and Economic Agreement. You call it CETA, we call it the AECG in Canada. So concretely, this means that 98% of the agreement terms are being applied and enforced. 99% of customs duties for Canadian industrial products and for European businesses are eliminated. So 99% of those duties are eliminated. So that opens up a lot of opportunities for French producers. So Canada has accepted to reducing 92% of the agri-food customs duties, as based on this agreement in September 2017. You can't really see this chart. It's really small, but it's saying that there's the elimination of customs duties in Canada for Europe. If we compare Canada and the European Union, so there are certain products that are targeted here for specifically for the beef, cheese. This will be done over 7 years, and you can see exactly what that represents for farmers in Canada. It'd be 92%, and over 7 years, so 92.9%, which will be eliminated. Sorry, here I'm shifting my papers around. Okay, here are some examples of customs duties that have been removed or have been lowered, sorry, for the agreement. So mineral waters, you export a lot of water, so it's 11%. It went down to 0 now. And that's a good percentage when you take these products through customs. That's a substantial cost for retailers, so would be distributors who would be buying in Quebec. So chocolate and candy products, sweets 6%, biscuits and pastries 15%. So that's quite impactful. Cheese as well, cheese. There were quotas that were accepted prior to our AECG agreement, and that was 25% of the cheese, French cheese. And so this group of products, after 7 years, will drop to 6.5%. So cheese as a French export represents about 34 million euros in 2015. As I said, Europe will benefit from additional quotas. And I think it will go from 18,500 tons in the upcoming years. Okay, of course, wines and spirits. French wine. It's different in France, of course, because sales go through the Quebec Alcohol Society, so it's strictly regulated. And French wine represented in 325 million euros. So for Canada, you are the 8th leading customer. So as of September last year, that 10% the taxes, customs duties were reduced, were eliminated. So the fundamentals of the agreement, this means it's a tool for SMEs and companies on both sides of the Atlantic. It doesn't mean that there's an automatic entry into the Canadian market. There are rules. There are rules in France, there are rules in Canada. But it will facilitate trade between our two countries. So I just wanted to really say that this does not change legislation or European legislation in any way. The European Union continues to apply the existing rules and verifying the substances, product substances, and can always use their traditional instruments to protect their farmers. Okay, what does it mean there to eliminate the tariffs for original, general, and specific rules? The assessment and compliance certificates, okay, that's less of an issue for you for appliances, and also it's really about facilitating customs procedures and developing new border control tools.
Ça veut dire aussi une meilleure coopération entre matières
It
de
means better
réglementation.
preparation
Il y aura un allègement
in
aussi
terms
des
of
exigences
legislation, better
administratives
cooperation. There will be
faciliter la mobilité
we're there to
d'emploi. Ça, je vais pas trop en
facilitate
parler parce que
this,
si vous
and there's
voulez des
also
informations, mais c'est vrai qu'il y a des
administrative
directives qui
requirements
sont
here
plus
for
faciles pour, entre autres, les entreprises
key
qui vont
jobs.
faire
Now
une
that's
implantation
companies,
au
say for
Canada et
instance, who
puis qui
want to
veulent
get set up
envoyer
in
du
Canada and they
personnel.
want to send the
Et
staff
aussi,
over,
ce troisième
that's
point
going to be
qui vous concerne, moi,
facilitated.
c'est les
Also, a
marchés
third point that's less of an issue for you, that's government
les
contracts.
marchés publics sont ouverts à
They're
l'Union
open
européenne,
to the
donc
European
pour tout ce qui
Union.
est, d'équipements, les routes, le transport,
For
matériel
big
médical,
machinery,
tout ça, tout ce qui est, achat d'hôpitaux.
bridges and roads, hospital purchases, and those kinds of things.
L'accord de nouvelle génération, ça n'impacte pas seulement les tarifs douaniers, mais c'est une mise à
The new
niveau
generation
de
agreement isn't
la
only
protection
customs,
européenne concernant tout ce qui est
customs
brevets,
duties,
marques, les
it applies to
processus. Et
patents,
surtout, ça, c'est une
brands,
des choses les plus importantes par rapport à
processes,
l'agroalimentaire, c'est
and this
les
is really important
indications
as
géographiques.
regards
Comme par exemple, grâce à
the
la
agri-food business. It's
AECG,
geographic
143
appellations, so you have
indications
143 geographic indications are protected in Canada,
42 proviennent de
of
la
which
France.
42 are included in France as well. No, including also 42 in France. Now, before we had 200 geographic indications that were recognized by Canada, and that was often for wine growing areas.
Les autres bénéfices de l'AECG, donc
Other benefits
reviens
of
aux
the
reconnaissances des
AECG,
indications
as I said, it was
géographiques.
recognizing
Donc,
the
comme par exemple, il y a le
geographic
reblochon, le
appellations, such
camembert
as
de Normandie,
these cheeses,
jambon
reblochon, Normandy
jambon de Bayonne.
cheese,
Donc, par rapport à
Normandy,
la
camembert,
France,
piment, Espelette,
faut
chilies,
savoir aussi qu'il y a des
ham
termes,
from
par contre, qui
Bayonne,
sont pas
but there are
indications géographiques.
terms that are not
Les mots
geographic
camembert,
indication,
ça
such
va
as
rester,
camembert.
ça sera pas protégé,
That
évidemment.
cannot be protected,
Puis
camembert, but
d'ailleurs, juste pour faire une petite parenthèse, on a
a bit of
un
an aside here.
camembert de Montréal.
We have a
La région de
Montreal camembert. Is that from Montreal
des
region? Right.
sacrés meilleurs camemberts au monde.
And
Je
it
pense que
was
c'est-
received the prize as the
J'aurais bien
best
voulu voir
camembert in the
quelques
world.
Français
I
dans
would
la
have
salle,
liked
mais
to
bon,
have
là-dessus,
some French
écoutez,
folks
j'ai
here
la
in
double
the
nationalité française,
audience. I have
donc,
a dual nationality
je prêche
myself,
pour les
French
deux
and
pays.
Canadian, but I'm a bit
Alors,
jealous there, though, a bit
il y a
envious.
aussi
So,
un partenariat
so
entre
anyway,
organismes de
partnerships between
certification, comme
certification
exemple,
organizations.
J'ai parlé que la semaine passée, il y a eu,
I mentioned last
pas
week,
la semaine passée, mais il y a 2 semaines,
actually
des
it was 2
rencontres
weeks
alternées
ago,
entre le Premier
we had
ministre.
the
Il y a eu
meeting
énormément
between
de
our
signatures
prime ministers.
d'ententes
There were a lot of
coopération.
signatures of
Et il y
agreements for
avait une entente qui
cooperation and
s'inscrivait
also
dans
an
le cadre de
agreement
l'AECG.
in
C'était
the
concernant
AECG
le CRIC, qui est un centre de
on
recherche industrielle du Québec.
CRIC, which is the creek here, which is a industrial research center in Quebec. And since we send medical devices and material, it has to be extremely legislated and it has to have the EC stamp. And sometimes it's complicated with the for businesses. So now within the framework of this exchange, they don't need to do that. They don't have to be stamped with both countries' certification.
Je suis revenue en arrière. Bon, les règles d'origine.
Okay, now rules.
Les règles d'origine, ça, je vous l'ai dit tout à l'heure, c'est primordial.
Rules
C'est
regarding
vraiment,
origin, that's
C'est savoir
critical.
comment est-ce que le produit, la
You have to
transformation
know
du
where
produit
the
s'est
product
fait.
is
S'il est entièrement
transformed,
tenu, fabriqué
packaged,
sur la zone de
processed,
libre-échange,
if it's
s'il est
completely
suffisamment transformé
produced in the
pour
free
pouvoir
trade
justement
zone, or if it's been
bénéficier
completely processed
de
somewhere else.
l'abolition des frais de douane.
So this will be determining in terms of
Je vais
whether or
essayer de
not
passer
they
quand même
go
plus
through the
rapidement sur les droits
customs
d'origine
duties
parce que
or free of customs duties or not. Let me try and get through this quickly.
c'est un peu compliqué, c'est un peu technique. Là, c'est une.
This is a bit
En fait,
technical
c'est
here, this
difficile de
part.
déterminer si le produit a subi une transformation jugée suffisante, ça je vous l'ai dit.
And then there are specifics
Et,
regarding
ça
the
précise
processing.
aussi
Of
chaque
course, as I mentioned,
produit,
also
ça a été
specifies
réalisé avec des matières
whether
provenant d'un
the
pays
raw
tiers.
materials were from a
Donc,
third country.
Pour justement savoir comment c'est fait notre
Now, to
produit,
know
ben,
how
il
the
faut
product
connaître
is
les tarifs
produced, you have to
s'appliquant
understand
aux
the
produits
tariffs that
exportés
apply
avec les
to
codes
the export
SH.
product. They have the SH codes. Now, what's that?
Alors, les codes SH, c'est un système harmonisé
SH
pour
codes
désigner
are
la
a
complexité de la
harmonized
marchandise. Avec la
system
AECG, ça
for
comprend environ 5
codifying
groupes de marchandises
the
identifiés.
merchandise. We
Et
have
ça
many, many
vise à
groups, and
faciliter
this
l'application uniforme au niveau
facilitates the
mondial dans la
application
classification,
globally
des marchandises.
of a merchandise.
Donc,
So if you have a processed product, you have to evaluate whether or not it's interesting to, perhaps maybe you could look at ingredients that you might want to get from other countries, or maybe get them directly in Canada, because that would be taken into account in the percentage of the processing that the original product undergoes. So I talked about this, proof of origin, declaration of origin. There has to be a report with that. It has to be included in the billing or in all commercial documentation required in import and export. So the declaration of origin has to be signed by the exporter. Here's an example of what that looks like. We try and go quickly over this. This is preferential tariffs. I'm presenting the origin, the declaration of origin, sorry. And here you have to have this translated if necessary from the country where the product originates. You have to have that translated into French. I'm afraid I'm going to lose my papers here. So Sébastien will help me pick them up, no worries. Now the products covered in the origin section are limited to annual quantities. Once the contingent has been completed, the products will not be admissible and cannot have the preferential tariff applied. For instance, cheese. If there's 16,000 tons, once the 16,000 ton mark has been reached, the cheese will no longer get that preferential tariff. I talked with someone who imports a lot of French cheese in Canada. You have to really keep up with these quotas. I don't verify that, but I can put people in contact so that you can get this worked out. Now, a couple of bits of advice here for businesses. I'm, of course, not a school teacher here, but you have to keep your documents at least 3 years. And this is really important. You have to develop the traceability system for your production processes, any raw materials purchases, components, etc. Because this is something the customs would not overlook. I've seen this for certain Quebecer companies that had to intervene because they were lacking some documents. Because what's really important to keep in mind is even if you have all of the origin declarations, all of that, every time you go through customs, the customers are there to do their job, and that's to make sure that there are no prohibited products coming through. Now, it can be annoying sometimes. A company that has their products blocked at the customs, not everything is perfect, but the customs agents are doing their jobs. And that's why we say that this new agreement isn't going to completely overhaul, completely change everything that is done. It won't completely change the travel of goods and services going across the border. Now, if you want any additional information on AECG, please feel free to get in touch. The AECG is about 5,000 pages. No, actually, it's 1,500 pages, 5,000 lines is what I've been told. So if you want to read this before going to bed, that might be a good way to have a good night's sleep. But it's very difficult to get through. So each issue, I'm not an expert, so I'd like to know everything about everything, but unfortunately I don't. If you have any specific questions, I'd be happy to put you in touch with the right people. So that's it for me. Was it too long, too short? Well, I don't know. Now, before we wrap up, I'd like to thank the organizers here of the MAID Trade Fair, Rebecca, Laura, Elodie. You guys were fantastic. And I also want to thank, they're not here, but I would like to thank the three renowned sisters working in nutri-marketing. They are a huge source of inspiration for Quebec companies. They help them understand what's going on in Europe for stamping, certification, packaging, information on the packaging. So they're really facilitators for these Quebec companies. So let me repeat, any questions, please feel free. I'm available. And so here are my contact details. Here's my email address. I'm actually not very far. I'm over in the 16th in Paris, Rue Pergolese Street. If you want to get in touch, please feel free.